Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. We're going to talk about the big question of Dungeon Master Fiat versus rules as written, raw. We're going to talk about Fiat versus raw, okay? And which one is more important and why, okay? I won't bury the lead here, okay? So one, every time I say Fiat, I mean Dungeon Master Fiat. Okay, a dungeon master doing something that is specifically not, that is really directly against what's in the rules. Okay, and so I'll say Fiat, I mean Dungeon Master Fiat. I'll say raw, rules is written. That means the text that's in the game. Okay, except for there's one special piece of text that is the whole reason we're talking today. Gary Gygax in edition 1. This has been in every edition. First edition, second edition, third edition, fourth edition, fifth edition. Right? It says the Dungeon Master has the authority to go off book and to change the rules and even ignore parts of the rules, and even, really has virtually no limits to what they can do in the game. That's part of the rules, right? But when that is enacted, it is universally understood to be DM Fiat, right? It's considered that the Dungeon Master is going against the rules as written, even though that is within the rules, okay? So that's part of the conversation. This is, well, by the way, we are in the deep end. Trust and believe. There's nothing simple about what we're about to talk about. This is the deep end of the pool, right? And that's okay. Like, that's one of the things that my channel is for, is talking about the deepest, most complex, most arcane corners of Dungeons and Dragons, right? If you want to, talk about how to get a better Ranger build, you can find that elsewhere. I'm not for that, right? I'm not saying that's not important. I'm just saying, like, you don't need me to do that because there's 5 other channels that do that well, and I don't want to be duplicative of other people's contents. And frankly, I don't think my content is a lot of people could say a lot of things about my content on Dungeons and Dragons and on YouTube. They can't say it's duplicative, right? Like, it's not, you don't really hear Scott Garibay saying the same thing a lot of other people are saying generally. All right, so here we go. All right. So you have all this, right? And so you have this eternal debate between Dungeon Master Fiat and Raw. And the reason we're talking about it today is Questing Beast on Twitter did a post, and he lamented the continued community battle over DM Fiat versus Raw, and how on Twitter there are dungeon masters, good dungeon masters, engaged dungeon masters with large followings on YouTube, large followings on Twitch, large followings on Twitter, going at each other over the issue of DM Fiat versus Raw, right? And what they're arguing over is the following. There are people who are saying, hey, you people need to get used to DM Fiat. I'm going to do whatever I want to do whenever I'm going to do it. And, and my players need to trust me, and your players need to trust you, and DM Fiat is great. And then other players are like, no, that's nonsense. Good DMs play raw. Rules is written, and they never use DM Fiat, right? And the reason why is the players take hours and hours and hours to read as much as 750 pages of rules for Dungeons and Dragons. Why punish them by throwing that all away so that you can go on a power trip, right? And there's good people in both camps, right? So I'm going to tell you what I think today and which one is more important. By the way, if you haven't checked out Questing Beast's channel, he's absolutely fantastic. He is an OSR specialist, old school rules specialist. He does a lot of flip-throughs on books. His content is amazing. He's really, really good. Treat yourself. Get on over there. Questing Beast is fantastic. Excuse me. All right, so which is better, okay? Well, it's raw. Rules is written is way better, okay? So I'm not going to say that Dungeon Masters should never use DM Fiat. They should never use Fiat. But I will say it is about 1 in 50 times that, I think 1 in 50 times that Fiat is currently used in modern Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition games, it's being used correctly. It's almost always used incorrectly. And I would say easily, and I would say the same, I would say 49 out of 50 Fiat champions are bad dungeon masters. And just are either bad dungeon masters or maturing dungeon masters. They're either they just have this bad wrong opinion because they're ignorant, and that's not as much of an insult as it sounds. It just means they lack knowledge, and they lack wisdom. I guess it is insulting. Anyway, so they're either ignorant or they're obstinate. They're like, that's the way I played in the 80s. I'm going to play it that way today, right? And or they're maturing and they're going to come to a better understanding that DM Fiat should almost never be used. I will tell you the very, very, very narrow band where DM Fiat should be used. I'll also give you some examples of how DM Fiat is being massively, horribly abused and how it's damaging our hobby today, okay? But DM Fiat is a major problem in the hobby. It's a major problem for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And actually, I said that backwards. It's a major problem for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and it's a major problem for the tabletop role-playing game industry. And that's the order, right? On questions like this, Dungeon Master Fiat versus Raw, rules as written, the whole industry follows what happens on Dungeons & Dragons. The conversation happens on Dungeons & Dragons first, and then the industry just does, the community does what happens on Dungeons & Dragons because Dungeons & Dragons is the flagship, okay? All right, so let's get into this, okay? So, one, let's talk about what Gary said to begin with, all right? So, Gary, so let's talk about the history of DM Fiat. So, Gary Gygax established DM Fiat. It's there, okay? So, first and foremost, let's not pretend the people who are saying that DM Fiat is legitimate, that's not really a debate. There are people who debate that, but it is, sadly, DM Fiat is part of the game, okay? And Gary put that in the beginning, okay? It's there. So any dungeon master who says, hey, I can do whatever I want in my game, they are 100% right. Here's the flip side, and this is what Questing Beak was talking about. That's not as good news as you think it is, or as they think it is. And the reason why is a lot of players get hit with DM Fiat, and they're like, oh, so I read 750 pages of rules, and I could have just done nothing because you can ignore those rules whenever you want. And I spent all this time building my character well so that I could deal lots of damage, but you're just going to double the damage of this other player for some arbitrary reason. What was the point, right? And they're walking away from the table. And there are players, and here's the part, right? You can use DM Fiat all you want, and the players can walk away from your table. And that's exactly what's happening, right? And honestly, I think there are, DM Fiat has done more to harm this hobby than almost any other element there is. DM Fiat is one of the biggest problems in Dungeons & Dragons. That's one of the biggest problems in the tabletop role-playing game community, and the reason why is it is massively overused. Only 1 out of 50 uses of DM Fiat today is appropriate, okay? And we'll get to what they are, okay? So there isn't a debate on whether you can do DM Fiat. The question is, yeah, you could do it, right? But people are just going to walk away from your game because they're incredibly frustrated with how you employ DM Fiat. So it's not enough for you to say, I can do whatever I want. If nobody's playing at your game, or if people are frustrated and you're sending people away from the hobby, that's a real problem. And not only is it a problem for your table, it's a problem for my table, right? Because if you screwed up and you use DM Fiat wrong, those players aren't going to be at the convention when they go to PAX Unplugged next year. They're not going to play in my in my Dungeon Master game that I'm running that's open to the public. They're just going to go play another game of Exploding Kittens, right? So your misuse of DM Fiat affects me, right? And it affects other DMs too, right? All right, so let's get into it. Let's get into what is the appropriate use of DM Fiat. Well, guess what? There's really only one appropriate use of DM Fiat today. Now, I will say, let's talk about Gary Gygax's history. When he created DM Fiat, there was a lot more uses for it, okay? Created it in 1974, right? The rules were they were playing Dungeons & Dragons, right? But those original rules were barely written. They were half-baked at best, right? So DM Fiat was really helpful because the rules were half-baked, right? So it allowed the DM to like adjust on the fly for some very serious deficiencies in the rule system that were, because it was so new, right? In addition to that, people didn't even know what this hobby was. There was no good examples for how to be a good player and how to be a good dungeon master. So having that DM Fiat, you could use it pretty extensively and you were just fine because there were so many problems to getting a Dungeons & Dragons game run well, okay? So when Gary Gygax created DM Fiat, there were lots and lots of legitimate, very appropriate uses for it, right? That's not the case today. That's not even remotely the case today, okay? When most people are coming to the game today, they have seen hours and hours and hours of streamers. They've seen this game played. They know what good players look like. They know what bad players look like, right? In addition to that, there are thousands of videos that say 10-minute videos, 1-hour videos, 1-minute videos that say, here's how to be a great player. Here's how to be a great game master, right? So all those smooth over moves that you would have used for DM Fiat before are now 100% unnecessary, okay? So all this, so huge swaths of what Gary originally intended the use for DM Fiat to be for are now absolutely, completely unnecessary, okay? The obstacles to the game in 1974 are certainly not the obstacles to the game in 2020, okay? All right, so let's keep moving here. All right, now, what is the only real appropriate use of GM Fiat? The only appropriate use of Dungeon Master Fiat today is to sweep in non-situational improvements to game design from other companies or from the future. Okay? I'll give you examples of this. Two good examples. I use both of these DM Fiats in my game right now. Okay? So in Dungeons & Dragons, I run Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I never touch the dice as the Dungeon Master. I use a variant from a few different games that I've played in the past, specifically Powered by the Apocalypse version, where the Dungeon Master never touches the dice. I absolutely love this style of play, and by not rolling dice, and so basically, the player rolls to attack, but the player also rolls to defend. I don't attack with NPCs. I just make the player characters roll to defend. Okay? And basically, as a game master, I never touch the dice. And so, there's some changes in my game that allow this very innovative, cool aspect. The other thing is that I no longer get to fudge. Right? It's not even possible for me to fudge my games. Ever. Right? I can't fudge. I cannot ignore the roll of the dice because all dice rolls are public. All right? That's important. Okay? So that's important to understand that. Okay? All right. So another one is the race question. So Dungeons & Dragons currently uses race for human, dwarf, elf. I can tell you right now, Mike Merles, Kate Welch, they are allergic to this word. They're super woke. They don't want that word in the game. It just came out 2-3 years ago. All the cool kid TTRPG designers are removing that word and replacing it with heritage or lineage or ancestry, right? I've already done that in my game. When we refer in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, we use the term heritage, right? This is a rules as written change, right? Now, these are non-situational. They affect every single player the same, and they sweep awesome innovations of rules into Dungeons & Dragons to be used today rather than waiting for the next edition of the game. That is a totally appropriate, awesome use of Dungeon Master Fiat and over Raw, where I'm ignoring Raw, right? Now, what are the terrible, 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 amazingly damaging uses of DM Fiat? Ignoring the dice. Every time you ignore every time you roll in secret, right? That is trash DMing. Just absolute trash dungeon mastering. You should never roll in secret, right? And the reason why is They all know what you're doing. You think you're being clever, and you think you're pretending that you're oh so clever, and that you're, that they don't know that you're ignoring the result, right? And making whatever you need to make whatever happens in your notes happen in the game, right? They know they're being railroaded. They all know it now, right? This is 2020, man. Like, there's a million videos, that it has explained this old trick. You're not smooth. You're not clever, right? So whenever you are ignoring the results of rolls, or if you get a brand new player, I have a dungeon master I highly respect who did this. Brand new player comes in. It was the wife of a player who had played in his game for 4 years, right? His wife comes into the game. Everybody's excited. The player's excited. The dungeon master is excited. And the wife is like, I don't know. Let's see how this works, right? Sure enough, she gets killed in the first game, right? Her character gets killed. He ignores the rules. He ignores the rules and says, that damage is not dealt to you. You're at 1 hit point, right? And so what he says to her is that the 750 pages that your husband spent his time reading, he shouldn't have spent his time reading that. It's a bunch of nonsense. I can ignore it whenever I want. It's stupid and it's trash, and you can burn his books because they're stupid, right? And also, what your husband takes time to do is a ridiculous, stupid hobby, right? Because what's the point of it, right? If we could do whatever we want, why aren't we just drawing pictures with crayons, right? Like, the reality, he should have let her character's death stand, right? Dealt with the problem and saying, hey, this is a dangerous game. I'm going to treat you like an adult and expect the fact that you can roll up a new character and that we can continue past this, and you can see that randomness in this game is part of the fun, right? So you're going to go through character generation twice, right? But instead, what he said is, we ignore the rules whenever we want, not even whenever it's a good idea or whenever it's convenient. It was just a terrible, 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 terrible example to her. And sure enough, guess what? She played 3 sessions and quit, right? And the reason, when they asked her why she quit, she said she didn't feel like she was being treated like all the other players. Yeah, that's right. She wasn't, right? Because he literally was not treated like he changed the rules for her in session 1. In session 1, right? And I know what you're saying. Like, she said specifically, they asked, were you treated inappropriately? And she said, no, it wasn't anything that anybody said. It was that their knowledge of the game was so high and her knowledge of the game was so low that she felt she had to be carried through the game. And she didn't like that. She felt like a backpack, right? And I was like, oh boy, wow. So that's the issue. Is we really got to get rid of this. It's a major problem. So, and that's the issue. Right now, DM Fiat is being used for 2 reasons. It's being used to ignore dice rolls. Always a terrible idea. Always a terrible idea. Always a terrible idea. And 2, it's being used for God mode DMing, right? Everybody wants to do it. They want to be in why wouldn't you, right? It's the one area of your life where there's no limits. You do whatever you want. You can ignore the rules. You can ignore the sentiments of your players. You can ignore everything. You're in God mode, right? But here's the problem. You are given these liberties by Gary Gygax to not use them, right? You should be using, you should absolutely be using DM Fiat to change the rules of the game, specifically only to sweep in new rules from other companies and other companies and the future that are delightful and that apply to every player, and to make changes non-situationally. If you're in the middle of the game and you're using DM Fiat to avoid a TPK, to avoid a character loss, you stink as a GM. I will say that right now. Like, you let the dice are sacred. Let what they make happen. And if you don't have the narrative skills to use to take your group past that, you should hang your dice bag up, right, and go play Exploding Kittens. Truly. DM Fiat is, and the reason why is you're hurting a lot of other people's games, right? So you got 2, you should, 1, if you're not willing to let your God mode go, If you're not willing to stop fixing your problems with DM Fiat, you should hang your dice bag up. Or start using DM Fiat exactly the way I just said, and then everything's cool. All that is my opinion. I'd love to hear your opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.